So, again, thank you for coming today. My name is Gwen Sorley, and we're going to be talking about ADHD. And is ADHD genetic? That's a question that a lot of you may have considered over the years. And it does seem that the answer is yes and no. How is that for a non answer? So it does seem that ADHD is more of an interplay between nature and nurture, what you're born with and the experiences you have. Here at Play Attention, we actually devise and customize neurocognitive training plans for individuals who have ADHD or weak executive function. And it seems that we rarely work with one family member. It's usually that we work with at least one parent and customize a plan for that parent and at least one child. And the reason for that is the quote that I have up above on the slide. And some of you may be able to relate to this. So a lot of times I'll be talking to parents and they'll say, I never knew what I was struggling with until my child was diagnosed. And then it all made sense. Have any of you experienced that in your own life? Go ahead and use the raise your hand icon if you can actually relate to that statement. A lot of you are raising your hands, or you can type yes in the chat box, either one. But a lot of you are raising your hands that you've actually had that same experience. I was talking to one mom not too long ago, and she said she was filling out one of those rating scales. Many of you have filled out those rating scales. And she said, halfway through, I realized I'm filling this out on myself. She said, I check the boxes myself more than my child does. So it is a big realization that not only is my child struggling in these areas, but I am also struggling in these areas. And it seems, because I've been using Play Attention with my clients and my students since 1996, so over 25 years. And it seems more so now within the last 4, 5 years that we're working with 3 generations, that we're not customizing plans just for the parent and the child, but the grandparents are also involved now. And we're customizing plans for the grandparents so that they can develop self regulation, they can develop executive function. We're developing plans for the parents and for the children. So it really does seem in many families to be genetic. The good thing is we know that through neuroplasticity that the brain is moldable, it's shapeable. And if we provide you the right tools and the right challenge, you can develop these skills despite your current wiring. We know that age is not a factor, and we know that labels like ADHD are not a factor. However, when we are looking at genetics, there are some reports that indicate that if a parent has ADHD, a child is more than 50% chance of having it. If an older sibling has ADHD, then that child has more than a 30% chance of also having ADHD. There are many scientists who theorize that ADHD probably involves at least 2 genes, and they're focusing on genes that are linked to the neurotransmitter dopamine. Now, dopamine actually communicates information between neurons, between your nerve cells. And so you can imagine that dopamine plays a critical role in executive function. So there can be a genetic propensity, there can be a genetic factor, but as you know, there are also other factors that can contribute to ADHD. And I was talking to, I'll mention a lot of clients that I've been chatting with because I think you can relate to many of them. I was talking to a woman just a short time ago, and she said, I don't know if I'm struggling with my ADHD now more because, it does run in my family. Is that a factor? Or is my ADHD caused by the fact that I'm aging, or that I'm going through menopause, or that I had COVID recently, or that I suffered a traumatic brain injury. And the truth is, we don't know exactly. And it probably is more of a combination of all of those factors that contribute to her ADHD symptoms. So many times there is not just one reason. But although we know a lot about the factors that can cause ADHD, there are also a lot of myths around this. And many of you may have run into these myths, and you may have experiences where, maybe another family member or perhaps a friend who doesn't exactly understand ADHD, they may have looked at you and said, well, if you were just a stricter parent, then he wouldn't act this way. Or if you didn't allow screen time in your home, then you wouldn't be experiencing these issues. Now, I know a lot of parents who do not have any video games in their home, and yet their child still struggles with ADHD. And you have to remember, too, that all screen time is not created equal. Or you may hear, well, if you just had better nutrition, that would take care of all of these issues. Now, these areas, these factors do not cause ADHD. Poor parenting, excessive screen time, eating too much sugar, these do not cause ADHD. However, it is important to know about some of these factors, be aware of them, because although they don't cause ADHD, they can exacerbate some symptoms. Just going back to screen time alone, we know that excessive screen time, and by excessive screen time, I mean at least 2 hours or more a day. And I'm not talking about work time, because as I mentioned, all screen time is not created equal, but we're talking about excessive screen time with high stimuli video games or media actually causes a lower metabolic rate in the frontal lobes. And the frontal lobes control your executive function. So, executive function can negatively impact your ability to focus, your ability to control your emotions, your ability to control your impulsivity. So, although excessive screen time does not cause ADHD, it can exacerbate some symptoms. So, you do want to limit screen time when it comes to high stimuli video games. Also, you do want to look at nutrition, because we know that foods that are high in complex carbohydrates or have omega-3 fatty acids, those types of foods do help improve focus. They help improve impulse control and memory. So you do want to be aware of these different areas and think about ways to really improve parenting, improve your ability to uh, limit screen time, improve your nutrition. All of these play a role. And if you are struggling as a parent, you may realize that your ADHD symptoms make parenting and family life challenging. So, if you yourself are struggling with ADHD and you have poor attention or slow processing speed, or you have a difficult time with your impulse control or your memory, you may be having a hard time just organizing yourself. Then you may think, if I can't get myself out the door in the morning, or if I can't complete my own tasks, how am I to organize an entire family? So at times it can seem a little bit overwhelming, because when you think about all of those areas of executive function, the planning, the prioritizing, just preparing the night before in order to make the morning a little bit smoother may be challenging. So we do have to look at some strategies you can utilize to make the home life a little bit smoother, to improve your own positive characteristics, to improve your skill set. so that you can plan and prioritize and not only get yourself out the door in the morning, but help organize an entire family to get them all out the door in a timely manner. Not only are those cognitive skills important, the ability to plan and prioritize, but when we also look at executive function, we know that a big part of executive function is emotion regulation. How many of you here today, you can raise your hand, use that raise your hand icon, or type in the chat box. How many of you in your household are struggling with emotion regulation? And that could be you're struggling with emotion regulation, or your child is struggling, or maybe many of you, multiple family members, are struggling with emotion regulation. And when I talk about emotion regulation or emotion dysregulation, as you may hear about it a lot of times, it's when you notice that your child has big, explosive moments to issues that seemed very small, right? They're not able to control their emotions. Jackie says her daughter, when she is premenstrual, gets it really bad. Yes, it is common, isn't it? And it can make the family dynamics very difficult. And if you're an adult with poor emotion regulation, then it can be very difficult to make parental decisions and make certain that when you're making parental decisions that they are consistent. Jeanette says, my son, when he does not get his way. Yes. Caitlin says, my mom used to call me Katie Kaboom. So that is very good. So that kind of summarizes it, huh, Caitlin, where you were having a hard time controlling your emotions. And it can, as an adult, really negatively impact how you make parental decisions and how you decide on consequences for poor behaviors. You can think about a scenario that probably many of you have had something similar happen, where your son gets a phone call from a friend across the street, and the friend wants him to come over and play a video game. And your son is so excited, and he has ADHD, he has weak executive function. So that means he doesn't stop and process that information. He doesn't use his working memory where he can actually draw on prior experience and think, the last time my friend called me and I went across the street without telling her, my mom, I got in big trouble because no one knew where I was. So he didn't draw on prior experiences. He just impulsively ran across the street, right? Because that's a big part of ADHD, is that inability to control impulsive behaviors. And so he impulsively ran across the street to play that game, searching out that immediate gratification. So that difficulty with ADHD symptoms, he was just running across the street to go play that game. Now, you also, as a parent, if you're struggling with self regulation and emotion regulation, when your child comes home, instead of utilizing your cognitive skills, instead of processing the information, using your prior experiences, drawing on your working memory to think about, he's done this several times. And although he's done this several times, every single time I ground him. And although I'm grounding him, I'm getting the same result. He's still running across the street without telling me. So you don't use that memory. You don't use your cognitive skills. You don't step back from that situation, self-regulate, and think about an appropriate response that will actually resolve the issue. You have difficulty with emotion regulation. So you just emotionally respond and yell and say, you're grounded. So now you've given out another consequence that will not resolve anything. You can think about it as kind of following a recipe. You have a really bad recipe for an awful cake. And although you know it's going to be a bad outcome, You continue to follow that same recipe, even though in the recipe it states you're going to get a bad result. You continue that same recipe. And that's what you're doing here. You're continuing those same steps and you're getting a bad result. So we have to utilize self regulation. We have to know as parents when to step back and process the information so that we can come to a resolution. So use a different recipe. Sit down instead of coming from an emotional spot, having that conversation. What did you do? How did that affect the family? What should the outcome be? What steps should you take next time? Where you can really think things through and talk about the consequence and give a consequence that will actually resolve the issue. Now, I'm not saying that the first time this is going to resolve the issue, because you and I both know that it's going to take a few times of this process in order for you to get the result that you want to get. However, it is important to not come from that emotional side, because when you come from that emotional side, not only are you probably very inconsistent in your parenting, uh, but you're also modeling emotion dysregulation. I was talking to a dad just a little while ago, and he said, you know, I really want him to develop better emotion regulation. And then he kind of stopped and he said, but I know where he gets his core emotion regulation, because I'm the first one to yell in a given situation. I'm not using my own emotion regulation. So we do have to try to develop strong emotion regulation so that we can model that for our children and get a better parental decision. So let's talk about some things that you can do to change those family dynamics and help the family grow. One step is to assess your strengths and identify areas that you need to improve. And this can oftentimes be a really critical part of making a plan of action. Like we said, many of you didn't even realize that you were struggling with ADHD, that you were struggling with executive function until your child was assessed. So, taking a moment for an assessment can be a really important part of then making a plan of action. And we should start with your strengths. What are the strengths you have? Because a lot of times when we talk about ADHD, we only focus on the negative. It's so easy to go to the negative. We do consultations all the time here, and some of you may have been in a consultation with us. And we start with, tell me about your strengths, or tell me about your child's strengths. And a lot of times it's hard to come up with the strengths. It's easy to come up with weaknesses, especially when an adult is talking about himself or herself. Sometimes they can really gravitate towards the negative, but we have to embrace the fact that there are a lot of positives when it comes to ADHD, right? You're creative, you think outside the box, you come up with ideas that no one has ever thought of because you see things differently. You do have that ability to hyper focus so that you're able to create and complete amazing things. So there are a lot of positives. And then once we look at those strengths, we want to pinpoint some of those areas of weakness so that we can strengthen those areas and really enhance the positives. So, in order to identify the weaknesses, an assessment does help, because you may think, I know he has a hard time completing tasks, but I don't know if it's really an area of concern or one that we need to address, or if it's just him being 8. Do all 8-year-olds have this difficulty? So when we do an assessment, especially a norm referenced assessment, it gives us a better idea of what areas we truly will want to identify to improve. Now, if you have not been through an assessment process as of yet, then you are interested to assess your own cognitive skills or your own executive function or the executive function of your child, we do have a couple of assessments available. One is called Focus, which is a norm reference test of attentional control. It takes 20 minutes, and at the end of the 20 minutes, it's computer based. We receive a full report that tells us how you performed compared to the performance of your peers. And we look at four different constructs of attention. We look at consistency, performance, impulse control, and your ability to deal with distractors, both auditory and visual. And that is appropriate for any age from 5 all the way up through adulthood. So that's an objective assessment. We also have a brief assessment, and the brief is a behavior rating inventory of executive function. And that gives us a good overview, a good snapshot of your executive function on a day to day basis. So it is a series of questions that address the areas of executive function. And of course, again, we can do that with any age from 5 all the way up through adulthood. So if you are interested in an assessment with us, we'd be happy to provide that for you. Each assessment is typically $50, and we do need about a 40-minute block of time to review the results with you and talk about a plan of action. And so if you would like to do an assessment with this webinar special, you will get purchase one. So buy one, get the other one at half price. So if you would like to talk a little bit more about assessments, or if you would like to register for an assessment, just type assessment in the chat box and one of us will reach out to you to discuss those different assessments and that process. So again, if you would like to consider an assessment or actually register for one, just type in assessment and we'll follow up to have that discussion with you. Now, we want to talk about not only getting assessments, but then we have to make a plan of action. What steps can we take to start developing some skills? And one area you may want to consider is parent training. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that parent training in behavior management as the first line of treatment before medication is tried. So again, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends parent training in behavior management as the first line of treatment. And this is for children who are 6 years old or younger. So it is critically important at those early stages to have training in behavior management. If the child is above the age of 6, there may be other treatments or therapies that are recommended, but parent training is going to still be recommended as part of that process. So it is really important to consider parent training. And some of you may be thinking, do I need parent training? I don't think I need to be taught how to do behavior management. It should be just something that comes naturally. And it doesn't. And when I was thinking about that question and the why should you consider some parent training? I was thinking about where we have all had experience with good behavior management and bad behavior management techniques. And that is in school. You can probably think back to your own experiences in school where you had some teachers that were really good and the class was just run really well, and some teachers where they could never get control of that class. And, teachers go through a lot of training for behavior management. Some people are really good at implementing it, some people are not. When I think back to my own experience as a teacher, I had in a middle school situation, I had a colleague who just really struggled with behavior management. And you would go into her room and it would be chaos. It would be absolute chaos. And all you would hear from her was, don't make me call your parents. Don't make me get the principal. Don't make me move you from that chair. Don't make me call your parents. And it was constant threats with no follow through and no real meaning to the consequences. And the students knew that. So it was chaos. But you could take that same group of students and move them to another classroom with a teacher who was well trained in behavior management. And that class would be Excellent. And learning would be taking place, and respect and conversations, communication. So, behavior management is a skill and it can be learned. And so, it is important to consider when you're looking at some different parent training programs, consider what should be included. So you're looking for a program that teaches you how to use positive reinforcement effectively. Because probably many of you have heard, use positive reinforcement and you think, well, I do. But there's a certain art, there's a skill to how to use it effectively. You also want a program that teaches you how to encourage those positive behaviors. We hear a lot of times catch them while they're being good, right? If you give them positive reinforcement about a good behavior. So, for example, when we were talking about your child who impulsively runs across the street and plays that video game without telling you, when your child actually comes to you and says, Billy just called me and wants me to play a video game. Can I go? You say, thank you for asking me. That was the right behavior. Positively reinforce the behavior you want to encourage. Also, teach you how to deploy consistent consequences when kids don't comply. Consistency is difficult. It's difficult for all parents, but especially if you're struggling with ADHD. So it is important to actually get some instruction on how to be consistent. So there are a lot of different parent training programs out there. And so you do want to consider some of the following because you want to choose the program that's right for you. So think about how the instruction is delivered. What works best for you? Is it in person instruction? So maybe you actually go to a psychologist's office who offers this type of parent training. Or do you do better if it's an online course? So consider how it's delivered. Also consider how you are to practice the skills you're learning. So you want to make certain that the program you enroll in is giving you specific activities or specific um, assignments to actually practice the skills you're learning, because it's one thing to learn theory and it's another thing to actually put that theory into practice. So make certain that there's a very structured approach to how you're going to practice your skills. And then also, you want to consider the pace at which you're expected to master these new skills. You know yourself best, you know your learning process, so make certain you're selecting a program that is paced for you. So here are some different programs. I just posted them on the screen that you can consider. These are a few of many. And, as I was looking through and preparing some of these lists for you, I did come across some good information on the CDC website. They have some really good information about parent training. Also, CHADD, they had some really good information as well. And of course, Attitude Magazine is always an excellent resource. So, really dig in and see if you can find a parent training program that will work for you. Now, there are three topics that I want to have you consider as we move forward. Because if we consider these three topics and how we can incorporate these into our day to day lives, you can really improve the dynamics of the family. One is to listen to understand, model compassion, and develop empathy. Now, all of these are skills. We shouldn't take it for granted that everyone knows how to listen, or that everyone is compassionate, or that everyone understands empathy. These are skills, and these are areas that can oftentimes be difficult for both children and adults with ADHD. So let's look at each of these topics and see how we can improve and incorporate these into our lives. First of all, let's talk about listening to understand. Listening is definitely an art. We may have all heard that we have two ears and one mouth so that we listen more and talk less, right? So listening is an art and it is a process. It is an active process. It's not a passive process. Because if you think about all of the different skills you need in order to be a good listener, there are many. If you are truly listening, not just listening to hear, but listening to understand, you have to stop what you're doing, really focus on that other individual. Listen. While you're listening to that person, you have to filter the distractions around you. And that's a hallmark of ADHD, isn't it? The distractors that get us off task. You have to be able to filter those distractions. You have to be able to process the information and then store that information in your memory. And these are really important cognitive skills that we need in order to be an active listener and in order to actually listen to understand. There are a lot of important reasons that we listen. Listening, really truly listening, helps us develop a connection. And you can all think about, as I'm reading this list, not only about your family dynamics, but think about friendships that you've had and how your closer relationships, your closer friendships are with individuals who are active listeners. If you have a friend who just simply does not listen, if you have a friend who doesn't seem to remember anything that you say from day to day, then it's going to be very difficult for you to develop a lasting relationship with that individual. So, when you are actively listening, it actually helps you develop a connection. When you are listening, it puts a spotlight on that other person. It helps you understand the other person. It makes it more likely that that person is going to listen to you. And that is a really important key right there. If you actively listen to your child and you are an active listener when your spouse or your partner is talking to you, then it's more likely that through that modeling, they're going to actually listen to you when you're talking. Also, it opens the door to long-term human relationships. And I have a really good example of the purpose of listening and how important that is. In my own life, I have a friend, and she's been a friend since we were freshmen in college. So 34 years we've been friends. And she has ADHD. And she just recently called me, maybe just a few years ago, and she said, "I don't know why you're my friend." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, I just realized that you're my closest friend. You're almost my only friend. And I was thinking about it and never listened to you. I We've talked all these years. I know you have three sisters, but I don't know what any of their names are." And then she started listing all the things that she didn't know about me after being friends for 30 plus years. And I know it's because she has a hard time being an active listener, right? So many of our conversations were very one sided. It was her talking about her experiences, about herself. There was a lot of interrupting. She constantly interrupts. But when she came to this realization and came to the realization that it was actually affecting relationships, it started changing. And now our relationship is that much better. She actually listens. She remembers from time to time what I'm talking about. She actually asks questions. She's not interrupting. So not only has it improved our relationship, but I've noticed over time that she has, within the last 4 years, developed more relationships, stronger relationships outside of her family, but also within her own family. So it's that realization that maybe you're not an active listener. Maybe you're not really listening to understand. That realization can start you on the path of making changes and start modeling this very important skill to your children. Also, we can take some steps, an action plan to be a better listener. So, very first and foremost is focus, no multitasking. So, just try this. Try this today. When your partner walks into the room or when your child walks into the room and starts having a conversation with you, stop what you're doing and look at that person. Close the screen on your laptop. Put your phone down. Put it face down so you can't see the screen. Turn off the TV and notice the difference that occurs. First of all, that person's probably going to be a little surprised. So there'll probably be a little pause in the conversation because they're not used to that. But it's so genuinely important that you stop and just focus on that individual. That is the only way you're really going to focus. You're really going to listen to understand. And that is great modeling because how can you constantly look at your child and say, stop looking at your phone? I need you to listen to me. When we are oftentimes guilty of our child's talking to us and we're constantly looking on our phone or texting someone else while they're talking. So start modeling that pure focus and listening. Acknowledge the other person. And that's very simple. While they're having a conversation with you, just oh, I understand. Just little words to make certain that they know you are engaged or summarize what they just said. So once they get done actually telling you the story about their day, you can stop and say, so, what I'm hearing you say is, and then you summarize what they said. That's a really great skill for you to do, but it's also a really great skill to model with your child so that when you get done talking to your child, do a reality check. Say to your child, so what did I just say? And have them say it back to you. Because remember, with ADHD, difficulty with focus, difficulty with processing speed, difficulty filtering distractions and holding that information in memory. So, as part of this skill building, do a reality check, have them summarize what they just heard. Also, pay attention to social cues. Most of our communication is nonverbal. And if you think about your relationships and when you're in social settings, you are constantly adjusting what you're saying or what you're doing based on the social cues you're receiving. So when you're looking for social cues and you notice the behavior, you notice the body language, you notice the facial expressions, those cues are so critically important because they're telling you how that individual feels about the topic. It tells you when to stop talking. It tells you when to ask a question. So it's really important that we start looking at those social cues and picking up those social cues. Empathize, don't minimize. This is really important. And it's something that a lot of us are really guilty of this specific scenario where someone is telling you a story and they get done with this story and you say, well, you think that's bad. Listen to what happened to me. And so then you take the spotlight. Remember, the purpose of listening is to put the spotlight on that other person. It takes the spotlight immediately off that person and puts it onto you. So make certain that you don't say, listen to what happened to me. You think that's bad. Maybe another thing that you could say is, tell me more, or what happened next? So that they know you are actively engaged and that you are empathizing with what they're going through. Okay. So those are just a few little tips on how to be a better listener. And these are some steps that you can take and you can incorporate today. That one I want you to do first off is no multitasking. I want you to try that today because that's something we're all guilty of, and we can change that today and start modeling that behavior. So that's how to be an active listener and listen for understanding. Also, try to be a role model for compassion and gratitude. If you are a parent with ADHD, you are in a you have a unique opportunity to truly understand your child who also has ADHD. And you may be the only person in that child's life who really understands what they're going through. So have those conversations and make certain they know, I understand what you're going through. I went through that when I was in school, or maybe even I'm still going through that now from time to time. So make certain that you have that understanding that you truly do have compassion for what they're going through because you've been there or you still go through that at times. But also recognize that you also have strengths, that even though some of these areas can be difficult, you also have strengths and you can persevere to really have fantastic outcomes, that you can really truly be the person you want to be because you're amazing and you have all of these gifts as well. So make certain that you talk to your child about understanding what they're going through. And we can also talk about gratitude by changing the way you provide positive reinforcement. And this will really teach how to express gratitude or how to be grateful and take the spotlight again and change it around. So instead of saying to your child, thank you for doing your homework on your own, take it one step further and say, thank you for doing your homework on your own. That gave me some extra time to focus on my own work. And I really appreciate that. So, see how you took that spotlight and you allowed them to see that they actually did something that helped you by doing their own work independently. They not only got their homework done, but they helped you get your own work done. So that allows them to start thinking about other people and how their behaviors, negative or positive, affect other people. So when you're doing that positive reinforcement, think about how you can take it one step further. Or you can change how you approach a problem behavior. And this kind of goes back to our bad cake recipe, right? Where we keep doing the same thing, we keep following the same recipe. So instead of yelling and saying, I can't believe you did that, you're punished, you're grounded, you made a mistake. We all make mistakes at times. It's important we learn from it. What can you do differently next time? And then when they do that differently the next time, remember to positively reinforce the behavior you want to encourage. There's another step you can take, and that's to make a family network. Make a shared plan on how you can all help each other. So it's kind of like LinkedIn for the family. So when you are looking for a network to assist you in business, right, you go to LinkedIn and you try to find people who have specific strengths in order to get a job done or to help you get a job done. You can do that same networking within your family because you all have different strengths and different weaknesses. So if you create a LinkedIn family network, you can actually help each other by using your strengths and observing other people's weaknesses and how you can combine them to improve the family dynamics. So, this is an exercise that you can all do as a family. First of all, you have to start by making a list of all of your strengths. So, have everyone make a list of their strengths. If you have a younger child, of course, they can draw what they're good at, or they can record what they're good at, or dictate for you what they feel their strengths are. Then, once you have a good foundation for what your strengths are, then, and remember too, I should mention this. Remember earlier, I said sometimes it's hard to think about your strengths. Make certain that if you have, especially a teenager who says, I don't know what my strengths are, model that for them. You know what some of their strengths are, express those so that they can start thinking about those strengths and write them down. List one thing. This is the next step. List one thing you want to improve. Just one. Don't make a big long list because that can be overwhelming, right? If we suddenly have a list of 10 things we feel we have to improve about ourselves, then that's going to be a bit overwhelming. So just select one thing you want to improve. And then once everyone's strengths in your network, your family network are down on paper, and your areas you want to improve are down, line up your weaknesses with someone else's strengths. And this can be done, let's say that you have a child and she's really creative and she's very artistic and you're really bad at organization. You can't get yourself out in the morning. You cannot think about the steps you need to take in order to get yourself and your family out the door in a timely manner. Then you ask your daughter, maybe it's Chloe is your daughter and she's really creative. Ask her to create a task list for you that you can refer to in the mornings to keep you on track. So that's a way that her strength is helping you. So again, it's making or encouraging your child to think about how their strengths can be utilized to help other people in the family. Or maybe mealtime is really hectic and you have a child who is so into the Food Network. Give him that opportunity to plan one meal a week because that will alleviate your planning time where you have to plan every single meal. Make certain that you work to that individual's strengths and say, you can take over one meal planning a week. Okay. So think about some creative ways to really create that family network. And when you do this, you're not only helping each other, but you're encouraging strong executive function. Because when you do family exercises like this, you are developing all of those processes of executive function because you do have to plan, you do have to prioritize, you do have to organize, you do have to listen and communicate and focus and use problem solving. So when you do these types of activities, you're strengthening executive function. And remember, we're talking about when ADHD runs in the family. So this type of exercise can really benefit everyone in the family. When you do this type of exercise, it also highlights the fact that although you may have deficits in some areas, there are ways to implement strategies that will help you be successful. And that is so important. So, we talked about all of these areas that we can start developing. So, I do encourage you to do an assessment if you want to identify strengths and weaknesses that in order to make a plan of action. Remember, if you want to chat with us about doing an assessment, just type assessment in the chat box and we can reach out to you and talk to you about the focus or the brief assessments. Also, we talked about starting to look into those parent training programs. Remember, where you can actually learn behavior management. It is a skill, and it's really important to develop that skill. Also, you want to work on listening to understand, developing compassion, and modeling empathy. Now, all of these tips and strategies are so important, but at the end of the day, it's really important that we get to the root cause. We have to address many of these cognitive skill areas that lay the foundation for strong executive function because we can give you tips and strategies, but you have to have strong cognitive skills in order to utilize these tips and strategies to their maximum. And that's where play attention can help. Play attention can customize a neurocognitive training plan for, remember, everyone in the family. As I mentioned earlier, it now seems that we're working with three generations. We're often developing plans for grandparents and parents and children, all within the same family, where we can pinpoint the different cognitive skills that right now may be weak, but are required for strong executive function. We've talked a lot about these cognitive areas during our session today. So, your ability to focus, your ability to process the information, your ability to draw on prior knowledge or utilize your working memory, your ability to filter out distractions, your ability to pick up social skills, to stay in the present moment. All of these cognitive skill areas are modules that we offer within Play Attention. And remember, when we customize your plan, we're actually pinpointing the different cognitive skill areas that are most important for you. So when we talked about that assessment earlier, we can also line those assessment results up with the different modules that we can put into your plan. And the important thing for you to remember is that no matter what cognitive skill area you're working on within Play Attention, you are actually utilizing our body wave technology. Let me see if I can get it without in my blur. So on the back of our body wave technology, there are 3 sensors. And those sensors simply rest on your arm. And those sensors monitor your brain activity that tells us how attentive you are. And then that information is given over to the computer where you're allowed to control all of those cognitive skills, whether it's working memory or attention stamina or task completion. You activate all of those cognitive exercises just with your mind, or more specifically, your attention alone. And you receive constant and immediate feedback as to whether or not you truly are focused and paying attention. And that's a really important first step in the learning process. We make certain that no matter which of those cognitive skill areas you're working on, you are actively engaged so that we can make certain you can apply all of those skills back into the classroom, back at home, back in the workplace. So if you would like more information on Play Attention, there are a few different steps I would encourage you to take. So one, I know that many of you here today have already been looking at Play Attention, or you've done a consultation with us and you want to start your program. If you would like to start your Play Attention program, you can simply type your phone number in the chat box and one of us will follow up with you. If you simply want to do one of those assessments and chat about the different areas of strengths and areas you'd like to improve in order to make a plan, type in assessment. Or if you would like to talk about your specific needs, whether you are looking at this for your home or your professional setting, we'd be happy to do a one-on-one consultation with you. You can type in consultation and we'll reach out to you to schedule a time. We need about a 45-minute block of time where we can talk to you about your specific needs. Or you can attend our next webinar. Our next webinar is in a couple of weeks, and that is Play Attention 101. And that will take you all the way through from the educational foundation of Play Attention, how the technology actually works, how we ensure transfer and generalization, the research studies that were done by Tufts University School of Medicine. We'll go through all of that in our next webinar. So if you would like to attend that next webinar, you can type in webinar and we'll make certain that you are registered for that next webinar. So again, you can simply start your program, talk about an assessment, do a consultation, or schedule to be attendees at our next webinar. And I do want to close by just summarizing again what we talked about today, because ADHD does seem to run in many families. And we know that it is important to take some steps so that we can improve our own cognitive skills, improve our executive function, so that we can have improved family dynamics. So again, you'll want to look into parent training. You'll want to develop some skills of listening to understand, model compassion and gratitude and empathy. And you can also consider actually getting to the root cause and developing these cognitive skills that are required for strong executive function. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. I really do appreciate your time. If you have typed in additional questions or requests in the chat box, just know that we will be following up with you for that assessment or the consultation, or we will see you at the next webinar. Thanks so much, everyone, and you all have a wonderful afternoon.